Welcome back, folks. It's the Fantasy Slant powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. And I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, back for another one. We're doing another IDP special where we're going to run through this week the NFC, an ambitious project nonetheless. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Ross Miles. Ross, what's going on, man?
It's been a tough week, Jeff. This is how I'm getting through it. Rum and a 1999 Rams playoff DVD. I'm just hoping that somehow, if I watch enough of this and get drunk enough, our backup quarterback will lead us to a Super Bowl and become an MVP. What do you reckon?
It is definitely tough. I think the problems for St. Louis may go back a little bit further than the Bradford injury. Maybe the Bradford draft pick, but I guess that's a story for another time. We know that lots of teams make suspect moves, and boy, the ripple effect with certain moves really lasts a long time. But you know what, Ross? I still wouldn't be surprised if we see, a 7-9, 8-8 season out of the Rams because that defense is so good, right? Looks like Ross may have frozen on us. So, well, I'll get started with this while hopefully he rejoins us. As I said, we're going to get into the NFC this week. Last week was a really ambitious dash through the AFC, and we're going to do the same thing, starting with the NFC East. And where we begin is with Dallas. Not a particularly ideal situation when Sean Lee, your stud, goes down in the beginning of the season. And really, they've been scrambling ever since. I mean, look at this offseason. We lost DeMarcus Ware. Now he's in Denver. We have Sean Lee out. I mean, we're in complete shambles. Anthony Spencer doesn't look like he's going to be back anytime soon. So is there any IDP value to salvage here? And I suppose there certainly is some, especially at the defensive back position. Last year we saw really an impressive tackle total out of Barry Church, really unmatched by any defensive back, and I believe off the top of my head, and Ross isn't even with us yet to correct me if I'm wrong, but only 7 players in total had more tackles, 7 linebackers had more tackles than the 135 total tackles that Church put up last year. So a really impressive performance. Now, initially in the preseason, I was downgrading my expectation. I didn't expect that Church was going to come out and match that output. You almost have to assume regression. But then Sean Lee happened again. And folks, if you're a dynasty owner of Sean Lee, I completely feel your pain. Sean Lee is perhaps my favorite IDP in the entire league. And you know what? I know it's a guilty pleasure in some senses because we know these players certainly have injury prone. Yeah, I'm not a big injury prone guy, but okay, I'm even willing to admit that Sean Lee is injury prone. So that happens, and I feel your pain if you're an owner. But this is good for Barry Church. This means this guy's going to be in there and have lots of tackle opportunities. So you have to like this if you're somebody who is sitting on Barry Church in a dynasty league. You have to like this if you're somebody who's identifying Barry Church as maybe value, although I think the secret is out. I've seen Barry Church going pretty early in a lot of drafts. And it looks like Ross is getting back up to speed with us here. You got to love the wonders of technology, everybody. So, Ross, as you're getting back up to speed, I just went off on a tirade about my Sean Lee love and hate at the same time. And what other value can be had other than Barry Church? Is there anything we can do in Dallas?
Yeah, Dallas. Well, yeah, I mean, I think George Selby is of minor interest at defensive end. He's not the sexiest of picks, but if you're looking for a D3, or well, hopefully you've been smart enough to get a better D3 than him, but he's in that kind of bottom end of the D3 tier. So if you're looking for a 4th or 5th defensive end and he's still on the board, he's of a little bit of interest. And another guy, if we're going to look at defensive line, Henry Melton. I know he's had injuries, he's moved over from the Bears, but we've both got him ranked higher than Selby, despite the fact he's going to play defensive tackle. I really like him as a top 5 defensive tackle this year in defensive tackle required leagues.
Sure, Jason Hatcher coming off a monster season. We'll get to Hatcher in just a moment, but there is lots of value to be had there. Now, if you're searching for value at that inside linebacker position, that Lee has since vacated. This is a mess, folks. This is an absolute mess. We're going to see Anthony Hitchens probably get the start here as the middle linebacker. That's very interesting. The rookie getting out there ahead of Rolando McClain. That whole experiment doesn't necessarily look like it's going to work. Justin Durant moved to the weak side. Kyle Wilbur is solidified as a strong side linebacker, and you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't there somebody we're missing? Yes, there's somebody you're missing here. Bruce Carter is not starting, so keep that in mind. He shouldn't be on your rosters. We warned you about this. We had this guy ranked very low throughout the preseason, so it shouldn't come as any surprise, and hopefully you traded him for pennies on the dollar in dynasty leagues. Ross, moving to the G-Men, the Giants. Here, there's a little bit more to like. Of course, we have Jason Pierre-Paul. I think he's going to strike some debate between the two of us, though I think I'm warming up a little bit more to your side of the story. John Beeson, the ever injury-prone, injured currently, but should be back by week 1. Of course, maybe Jaquan Williams getting out there in a 3-down role, and Stevie Brown and Antrell Roll both offering some really good value at the safety position. And finally, one of the better corners in the league in terms of fantasy production last year, Prince Amukamara. So, Ross, thoughts on the Giants?
Yeah, there's a few Giants you can definitely add to your fantasy roster. Some going to be more impactful than others. JPP is probably the most notable one. I mean, like you said, we do have a little bit of differences where we rank him right now. I've got him 4th. We've talked about this on plenty of other shows. You've got him just inside the top 10 at 9. I think it's one of those you've got to take a stance on. We know he's immensely talented. We know he's a physical freak, but is he fully fit? And is he the player he was 2 years ago? Watch the preseason and make a decision for yourself, really. A couple of other defensive ends, obviously Kiwanuka and Moore. Moore was a rookie last year. He was one of my favourite guys. I expect him to come on. I think he should assume the role over Kiwanuka by the end of the season, but that's to be seen. Kiwanuka is one of those guys who's always kicked around the skirts of fantasy relevance, and I think it's going to be another one of those kind of seasons for him, although he's penciled in as the starter. But yeah, mainly the main place to look at is definitely safety. Stevie Brown, we've both got ranked just outside the DB1 tier. I've got him 14, you've got him 15, Jeff. The reason I like him was the upside he showed 2 years ago when he was fit. He made 8 interceptions and turnovers. He was a points machine. So I think he is a sneaky one. I think we're probably higher than most in the industry. So you could almost certainly get him as a DB3, I would think, in the drafts.
Oh, absolutely. Tons of value there. One of the things we got to note about Antrell Roll, too, is he did play. He played really impressively last year. He put up big IDP numbers, yet part of it was because he was seeing some of that slot coverage, in the nickel. It doesn't look like he's going to be playing that spot this year, so just to pay attention to that. And boy, oh boy, you mentioned Demontre Moore. If you're looking for upside, you're in a deeper league, you're looking for upside. I mean, chances are people know his name already. But boy, did he look good in that last preseason game. Now, against the twos, yes. But there is upside there. And like you, Ross, I'm thinking Kiwanuka is more of a guy, whereas Moore, that could be something there. Not going to be immediate. Definitely not going to be immediate. Let's move to a team near and dear to my heart, the Philadelphia Eagles. And yes, there's value to be had, but it's not exactly the Eagles' defense from the Jim Johnson era. But at defensive line, hey, we're still waiting for Fletcher Cox to arrive. There's enormous talent here, but he has yet to sort of reach that potential. And I don't know if it's going to happen this year either. Cox is a deep league guy only, but the linebacker spot is really where you're looking at. D'Amico Ryans obviously had a very impressive statistical season last year, but if you look closely at how he played, I don't know if his play actually matches up to the numbers. And what's really interesting is Michael Kendricks, though early in the preseason I had this guy ranked above Ryans, or ranked below Ryans, that is, I've changed my tune. Kendricks looks like he's shot out of a cannon this preseason, and he's shooting up my rankings. I'll have a rankings update later on, probably over the weekend, one of my final rankings updates, and Kendricks is going to be ahead of D'Amico Ryans. He's also their only dime backer, so you absolutely have to love this. Kendricks looks like he's reacting now. Before it looked like he was thinking. The first 2 years in the league, he was thinking. He was diagnosing and thinking, and now it's like not even diagnosing. Now it's a split-second decision. Boom, he's gone. And you absolutely have to love that out of this guy. I thought he was going to break out last year. It looks like I might have been a year early on him. Other than that, I think you can get a little sneaky value out of Malcolm Jenkins. I've been vocal about not necessarily being a fan of his on the field, but that doesn't mean you can't get fantasy value out of him. So, Ross, I went a little overboard because it's my Eagles. You're going to do the same thing when we get to your Rams, but what are your thoughts about this Philadelphia Eagles team?
Yeah, it's a team that I'm not really picking up many players from during drafts. They say Fletcher Cox is, again, for us, he's a DL4. Both of us are really looking at the rankings, so he's not really a guy I'm aggressively pursuing. I normally draft better IDPs than that. As for Ryan and Kendricks, I am significantly lower than both of you on both than you, and I've got Kendricks behind it. You know, the Kendricks is one of those kind of hype players who I've never really fallen in love with, and I've seen he always gets picked earlier than I'm willing to go. At the minute, I've got Ryan's 29, Kendrick's 36. They probably need bumping a little bit, but I think the main difference between us is guys like Perry Riley, Mason Foster, C.J. Mosley, some of these guys that are taking a step forward or have just joined the league. Shazier, I'm ranking them above Ryan's and Kendrick's where you're not. So that's mainly the difference between us, although I think I need to revisit that. But the one player I do want to touch on is Malcolm Jenkins. I agree with you. There is a shade of value in him. I've got him 29, you've got him 35, Nate's got him 36. So he's a very interesting guy to sort of pick up as your third defensive back or your fourth defensive back.
Sure, we annually see lots of value coming out of these defensive backs in Philadelphia. Even players who aren't really, that skilled of a player can put up numbers. I mean, Kurt Coleman, look, a couple games he was a monster 2 years ago. So, and Nate Allen, I mean, these guys are putting up numbers there. So, absolutely, you have to like that. Part of the good thing in Philadelphia is that stats crew is going to give out more solo tackles than most stats crews will. Moving to Washington. Washington is an interesting place for me because, hey, I know some people like Jason Hatcher. I'm not really crazy about him in the 5-tech, but where I am really interested is in that inside linebacker spot. Perry Riley kind of assuming that, taking the torch from London Fletcher. Hopefully we'll see him in a gold jacket in the not-so-distant future. But Keenan Robinson as well out there. Weren't necessarily sure what to expect out of this guy. We've seen injuries out of him the first 2 seasons as a professional. But then, there's talk, okay, well, maybe he's going to be the starter. Oh, he's going to be the starter. Oh, maybe he's going to get 3. He's getting 3 down, and I'm getting fired up because, Ross, we talked about this guy, probably a month and a half ago, and I was like, I don't know. Then I saw him play, and he's dynamic. He's aggressive. He's going, he's violent. And he looks pretty natural out there. And Ross, the buzzword that you were saying about him, I think it holds true. Sideline to sideline. So I guess, are you still thinking the same thing after seeing this guy play?
Yeah, I am. He is a guy who's been on my radar for a little bit longer than the last couple of months, and more like a year and a half now, mainly just because Fletcher was so obviously coming to the end of his tether. And, we had to look through the linebacker core there, and Robinson was the guy that kind of jumped out to me. But, like you said, I've already touched on Riley when we talked about the Philly linebackers. I'm high on him. He's 25 for me, 27 for you. Robinson need to bump up my rankings. But I don't think that's the only linebackers you need to sort of really mention in Washington, because in big play leagues, I think Arakpo and Kerrigan both offer a little bit of interest. Both of them could probably put up double-digit sacks. Kerrigan, it might be a bit more of a stretch, but Kerrigan's got the safety of his tackle numbers to fall back on. So those are 2 guys, in big play leagues, I would probably consider a little bit further. And then cornerbacks, obviously, D'Angelo Hall is an absolute staple in cornerback required leagues, even in leagues where you combine cornerbacks and defensive backs. I think Hall's still rosterable if you can start 3. The one to maybe take note of is Tracy Porter, who did probably score as a CB2 last year, but moving to Washington, he's going to have to compete with last year's rookie David Amerson to play as a number 2, so he might lose a fair bit of value.
Yeah, absolutely. And Arakpo is a great call. He's looked pretty good so far this preseason. D'Angelo Hall necessarily hasn't, but that's he's still going to put up his numbers, so no worries there. Let's move to the NFC North, and we're going to start in Chicago. Chicago, obviously, a historically bad run defense last year, and really a defense in shambles. Not really entirely their fault. A lot of injuries hit them pretty early, and then when you're having to rely on rookie running backs, you never really want to have, or rookie linebackers, you don't really want to have to do that. But they took some steps to upgrade this defensive line, adding the veteran Jared Allen, and perhaps one of the most coveted defensive ends in this year's free agency in Lamar Houston. They also added Willie Young. Ross, this is a nice rotation right off the bat. Houston, arguably the league's best run defending defensive end. We know Jared Allen, hey, he's on the wrong side of 30, but he's not 40 years old. He's still got some juice left. And the thing is, this guy's played over 1,000 snaps in each of the last 3 seasons. He's not going to do that this year. If he's in that range of 700, 750, I mean, we could easily see double-digit sacks, no problem. Yeah, the tackle floor isn't going to be as high, but you got to like that out of Jared Allen. There's also, some value potentially to be had at the linebacker situation, though we have to be well aware of what's going on. Lance Briggs is back. Yeah, he's a low-ceiling guy, but he's a guy who certainly can put up some LB3 numbers and will play every down. DJ Williams is not likely going to be that guy. So far, what have we seen out of Chicago? Very interestingly, we've seen a little bit of a rotation with DJ Williams playing the base down snaps and then John Bostic coming out in the sub-package snaps. Does this mean, hey, Bostic's next man up? Well, not necessarily. This could just be what they're comfortable with there in Chicago. And if it's any indication, that means that neither one of these two guys will have IDP value through the season. But, of course, Charles Tillman will, and we might be able to get some value out of those safeties, but we're still not sure. It looks like Ryan Mundy and Brock Farine are going to start streamer thing. Ross, though, I want to go back to, again, the defensive line and the linebackers. That's where we're really focusing on in Chicago.
Yeah, you're right, Jeff. Both Houston and Allen rank quite in our top 20. I'm really high on Houston. I've picked him up in a lot of fantasy leagues this year. He's my number 12, so he rounds out my DL1 tier. So I've got him in front of people like Ziggy Ansah, who's moving up many boards for quite a lot of people. Jared Allen, I agree, is also. I've got him a bit higher than you. I've got him 17. You've got him 21. So I think he's still going to retain some of that ability, but it was definitely a mental hurdle to get over when I had to sit there and move Lamar Houston above Jared Allen on the same team. I sat there for a while looking at it again. Can I really do this? Can I actually? Jared Allen's pretty beastly, but no, I genuinely think Houston with his tackle upside will outscore him this year in Chicago. But as you talk about the linebackers, again, I tend to stay away from those outside linebackers, even people like Briggs. So he's not one of my favourite picks. I've only got him 46. You've got him 38. But yeah, DJ Williams is the other one I am keeping an eye on. But he, like you say, he isn't a 3-down linebacker, and that really steals a lot of his value. So I've got him 49. You've got him 59. So yeah, that doesn't really keep him in that fantasy relevant situation. Touching on Charles Tillman, I'm a little bit stuck on Tillman because his numbers last year were so poor in the sense of yards given up, touchdowns given up, points per snap given up, all those kind of things. But yeah, it's Charles Tillman. This is one of the best corners we've seen in the last decade and in the fantasy factor. And obviously we already know that not playing very well increases your target. So despite playing poorly and maybe not having the impact he has had in previous seasons, I do expect him to still be fantasy relevant. I've got him 18, you've got him 21, Nate's got him 23. So we will see definitely a relevant season from Tillman again.
Yeah, absolutely, another relevant season. You mentioned Ziggy Ansah, and I think that's a nice little segue into the Detroit Lions. Ziggy Ansah, a really impressive stat line when you look at it from last year. 8 sacks in the rookie year, and you really wouldn't have known it too much if you watched the games. You weren't really paying attention. It's kind of a silent, sneaky 8 sacks, and he's going to be, in a better situation to put up bigger numbers this year. We're expecting him to see more snaps, see the field certainly more, and another year of progression, hopefully, as a professional. This guy was still very raw last year and put up some interesting numbers. So if you're looking for high ceiling DL2s who could possibly blow it up this season and become DL1s, Ansah's got to be at the top of that list. Now, of course, the defensive tackle position, yeah, if you're in defensive tackle leagues, Ndamukong Suh is pretty much a staple of that format. I'm not drafting him in non-defensive tackle leagues, but yeah, you're going to look at him certainly there. Now, the linebacker position, though, this is interesting, Ross. Okay, we know Stephen Tulloch has an extremely high floor, maybe not a very high ceiling, but he's a safe, borderline LB2, more like in the LB3 range, but a safe player. Whereas DeAndre Levy, we know he has a massive ceiling. This guy was a top 10 linebacker last year in pretty much most all fantasy formats, yet I'm not convinced of his floor. Does he have a high floor? He had an impressive total. He has 6, off the top of my head, I think it's 6 interceptions last year. So obviously that helps pad the stats. that's not replicable. You can't expect a player, a linebacker, to come out every year and put up that many interceptions. Plus, he has a different defensive coordinator now, with Jim Schwartz now in Buffalo. The slightly different system isn't necessarily going to favor the weak side linebacker as much. So I'm not convinced of taking DeAndre Levy, as one of the top 20 linebackers off the board, where I know we've seen a lot of folks do that. I'm much more comfortable with him in that LB3 range. And Ross, we've seen this before. We've been down this road before with Detroit safeties. Every year we think, okay, last year was Glover Quinn, we would have thought. This year James Ahedebo comes in after a nice season of production, but I'm just not buying it. I'm staying away from any and all of that secondary. Ross, thoughts on the Lions?
Yeah, ditto on the secondary. I'm staying well away from it. Can't disagree with your projections on Answer. He's definitely an upside player. I wasn't hot on him coming into the season as a rookie, reviewing his tape and understanding his background, but he really grew on me as the season went on. If you watch this guy, you can see he's got talent, he's got ability, he's going to be a playmaker in the NFL. On that line with the pressure of Sue and Fairley, assuming Fairley can get on the field, he's going to have plenty of productive games. Obviously, I've just mentioned Nick Fairley, and he's a guy who you no longer have ranked, Jeff, at defensive tackle. Obviously, we've heard a lot about his weight issues and his contract issues in the off-season. So he's a guy that I would probably say has fallen off the radar, and I think he deserves to have fallen off the radar at least. He is someone who's nearly always going to be drafted in defensive tackle required leagues, but he's a risky play despite the fact he's a known quantity. Talking about the linebackers, again, can't disagree with what you say about Tulloch. He's a very steady, bottom end LB2, top end LB3 player. But Levy's one we've disagreed on it. We disagreed last year, and we're seeming to disagree this year. I think Levy suffered from a couple of years ago when he was in that kind of rotation when no one was really a three-down linebacker, where Durant and Tulloch were all involved, and they were rotating in and out. He never really capitalized on his fantasy potential, and once he was finally given that opportunity last year, he really sort of got the tackles and made some big plays. Now, I agree with you. You can't expect him to make multiple interceptions and score multiple touchdowns like he did last year, but I'm not quite sure if I'd knock him quite as low as you. I've got him 32, you've got him 37, Nate's got him 30. It's one of those where I think it's really tight this year. From that 20 to like 30, 35 range for linebackers, it's pretty difficult to pick out who you prefer. And Levy's one of those guys you need to get on the right side of. The problem is, like Jeff said, because he performed so well last year, he's being overdrafted. So even if you do have him at the right spot, which may be higher than we've both got him, I don't think you're going to get him at that value this year.
Absolutely. You always have to pay close attention to what actually produces the fantasy points, not just the fantasy points themselves. And like I said, when I ran this through, part of the reason my ranking is the way it is when I ran this through my projection model, this is where Levy came out, and I'm going to trust that model in some cases. Some cases I might not, but in this case, I really do think the model has Levy about right in that LB3 range. I might be a little low on him. Again, in the rankings update, he'll probably move up a few spots, but he's not going to be inside my top 30. And I think that's a really important takeaway if you're considering drafting Levy. I would rather go in other directions. One of those directions, Ross, might be Brad Jones in Green Bay, who is still being undrafted. The fantasy community is not catching up with this. This guy is starting, and he's playing every down in Green Bay. And when we've seen him do this in the past, when he's healthy, he's put up LB2 numbers. You cannot beat that. That is extreme value. Don't worry about A.J. Hawk. I've never been on the A.J. Hawk bandwagon, though there are a few other, obviously, places you can get some serious fantasy value. Now, Morgan Burnett, everybody knows about this guy, and he's going to be one of the top handful of defensive backs off the board, and certainly that's warranted. But can you get value at that other position? I know some people have been looking at Clinton Dix. He's not guaranteed a starting spot, folks. He's still battling with Micah Hyde for that starting job. So I wouldn't necessarily invest in him right now. Of course, keep him on your list of streamers later on, though I still think he's going to kind of be a Jairus Byrd clone. And then finally, one other player I'll mention before I toss this over to you, Ross, is Mike Daniels. If you're in a deeper league where you're looking to get some value at defensive end, Mike Daniels is a player who really started to come on last year as a pass rusher, and this year he will also get some early down work, so that means more tackles, so a higher tackle floor plus a decent sack ceiling. No, he's not going to go out and put up 15 sacks, but I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up 9 sacks, maybe 10 sacks. That might be pushing it, though. 8, 9 sacks is a really reasonable range with a decent amount of tackles. Hey, if you're in a deep league, you really can't beat that, and it's a name that most people in your league probably aren't aware of. So, Ross, thoughts on Green Bay?
Yeah, Brad Jones is definitely the big takeaway when you're looking at IDPs in Green Bay. He has secured his place on the Ross Miles Sleeper 2014 team for sure. I own him in nearly every fantasy league. He can join Wesley Woodyard and Koa Misi as my linebacker core all day. I've got him 21, you've got him 26, so we're both confident he's going to probably be pushing into that LB2 tier. I know, we know we're both going to be doing rankings revisions over the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if he did creep into my final top 20. The other takeaway is obviously Morgan Burnett and Clinton Dix at the safety tandem, not because of Clinton Dix having a fantasy impact directly, it's more indirectly because, like you, I see him as a Jarius Byrd style player. He's going to be more of a centre field kind of covering safety. He's going to be making interceptions, the last line of defense. That frees up Burnett to get in the box even more. And obviously, when you're a strong safety and you're guaranteed tackles by getting in the box, it gives you a lot of fantasy value. That kind of safety and security means I rank Burnett number 2 overall this year.
Now, one other thing I would be remiss to tell you and discuss with everybody is that Julius Peppers is there, obviously, and it would have been great if he would have gotten D classification, but he's an outside linebacker. And don't dispute this. The proof is there. When we watch the games, he's playing outside linebacker. So it is what it is, and he's probably not really worth it may be a big play deep league and the 0.1% of leagues out there that are that. Otherwise, Clay Matthews is the only outside linebacker, and even with him, you're probably not. You're going to look in other directions. Von Miller, Justin Houston, if you want to get value at that kind of a position. Now, moving to Minnesota, obviously Jared Allen out of there. In the wake, we may see Everson Griffin step up. He's really one of my favorites to really break out this year. Brian Robinson has been solid in the past, and there's no doubt he'll continue to be that kind of guy. 8, 9 sacks, a decent amount of tackles, but really not the potential to break out in a huge way, whereas we could see that with Griffin, especially working with Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer also loves those defensive tackles and getting those defensive tackles to an elite level. Like we saw out of Geno Atkins, well, we may see another type of player like that in Sharif Floyd. Sharif Floyd is actually a player I've seen since his high school days. He was a Philadelphian and then went down to play in Florida and then, gets drafted and notoriously sort of slides a little bit on draft day, but then wasn't very impressive last year. Well, he may have gained a little weight. That's part of the problem, and I don't think Zimmer's going to have any of that. Interestingly enough, Mike Zimmer has a strong side linebacker on the Vikings named Mike Zimmer, but he's not going to see the field. Who is going to see the field, of course, is Chad Greenway. Anthony Barr, the rookie, is going to be on the field as well at the strong side position, and he will kick down in most situations in the sub-packages to defensive end. So he's going to kind of have that Von Miller role, a very poor man's Von Miller from a fantasy standpoint. The middle linebacker situation is an absolute mess. We've seen Jasper Brinkley playing most of the snaps with the first team in the preseason, though we've heard from Zimmer that Brinkley and Cole are kind of neck and neck. Audie Cole is there, of course. Yeah, I don't know who's going to win out of this. I don't really care. I'm avoiding this situation. Yes, there is value to potentially be had there, but your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's something to pounce on if Cole does get a 3-down job, but otherwise I don't really want any piece of Brinkley. And, of course, Harrison Smith. We know he's a monster. When he's healthy and on the field, this guy's an absolute monster defensive back, going to put up a ton of numbers when he's there. So you have to love that. Ross, Minnesota.
Yeah, so defensive line, Brian Robison's just been one of those guys for quite a while in fantasy. When if you've got an injury and a bye week, you're carrying limited defensive line when you raid the waiver wire. Oh, Brian Robison, he'll probably do this week. He's still that guy. Everson Griffin, he's a guy who's interesting to me. Now, if you're playing the waiting game when drafting your IDPs, I think he makes for a really exciting DE2. But if you're a little bit more aggressive, I prefer to sign up and lock him in as that DE3. If you've obviously not front-loaded your offensive roster, I wouldn't be quite as confident with him as my DE2. I've got him 23, Jeff's got him 19, Nate's got him 21, so he's definitely in that bottom of DL2 tier. Touching on the linebackers, Chad Greenway, of course. I've got him ranked number 12, so I think he's an LB1. He's the guy I see slide just because he's not that same, he's not the name that you get with many other people. People prefer their Willises and their Wagners. And I think Greenway just offers that little bit of value because he's in Minnesota really. And like you said, the Brinkley Cole thing's just rumbled on and rumbled on. It's kind of killed the value there. If you've got him on your team and you're in a dynasty league, I don't think it's the end of the world. I'm talking about Cole here, but in a redraft, I'd be a little bit more skeptical. I'd probably think about dropping him, mainly because there's probably guys out there who have more value. Your Emmanuel Lamores, I've already mentioned. Koa Misi, Brad Jones is a guy we've just told you is not really catching on with the IDP industry. Yeah, he's going to be probably a top 20 linebacker for me over the next few days. So, yeah, avoid Cole and Brinkley. You can find better linebacker value elsewhere.
Absolutely, and maybe that value might be in the NFC South, in Atlanta. Now, I don't have much to say about Atlanta, so this will help us move this thing along a little bit quicker. But I will say I'm enjoying Hard Knocks. It's just one of the best it's the best football documentary series of all time. Not that there are lots of them. I think there's one about the Gene Simmons Kiss football arena team. But anyway, about these Falcons, Paul Warlow really benefited from Sean Weatherspoon's injury from an IDP standpoint. Warlow is pretty much locked into an every down role, and he can put up tackles when he's out there. He's not the best linebacker on the field. No, he was an undrafted free agent for a reason. But that doesn't matter to an IDP owner. You want this guy to put up numbers, and that's what he's going to do. Right now, it looks like Joplo Barto is going to start alongside him, but the Falcons did something very interesting in this last preseason game. Those of you who watch Hard Knocks, you're like, wait a minute, Prince Shembo's with the ones. Yeah, he was. Bartu came off the field, and Shembo played the rest of the series with the ones and then played with the twos as well. I don't know what this means. I really wasn't convinced that Shembo was going to get that job, but hey, stranger things have happened, so it is something to pay attention to if you want to catch some value, especially in dynasty leagues. Shembo's an interesting player to slap on your roster at the end of your bench. And, of course, the only other player that I'm going to mention is William Moore, Willie Mo, and I absolutely love his little banter with Roddy White on Hard Knocks. And, obviously, Moore is a guy who you can get some fantasy value out of. He's a DB2. He's not going to put up massive, massive numbers, but he's right squarely in that DB2 territory, and he will put up some good numbers as your second defensive back. Ross, Atlanta Falcons.
It's funny, the Willie Mo and Roddy White banter was a topic of conversation in my office in London the last few days because we've also been watching Hard Knocks. And yeah, one of the takeaways for me was that there was Prince Shembo. Was it in episode 2, I think, where he was given a run out with the ones and asked to call defense in practice, and he seemed a little bit surprised. And they're like, take responsibility, son. This could be your job. So yeah, that definitely caught my eye. So Shembo is a guy I'm keeping an eye on, but not from a redraft perspective. Warlow's locked in right at the end of my LB1 tier. Wemo is a top DB2, but they're probably the only two guys I'm going to touch. Although in cornerback required leagues, Desmond Trufant does hold some interest. He is one of the better cornerbacks for IDP leagues.
Absolutely. Now moving to Carolina, Greg Hardy, excuse me, folks. Greg Hardy facing a potential domestic violence suspension. The commissioner actually announced today, the day of this recording on Thursday, August 28th, that there will be stiffer penalties for domestic violence, which we have to absolutely applaud the league for that. And so really there's some questions as to how this will be handled for Greg Hardy. As of right now, given no suspension, yeah, he's the number 4 defensive lineman. If he's suspended, that's obviously going to change, and it's going to change depending on the length of the suspension, so stay tuned. Charles Johnson isn't what we saw out of him a couple years ago, but he's still a DL2, a lower ceiling certainly than Hardy, and a lower floor than Hardy, but fine for where you're probably going to get him. Of course, you don't care about Charles Johnson. You care about Luke Kuechly. We all care about Luke Kuechly, and this guy's fantastic. On the field, he's fantastic as an IDP. You love this guy, but you're going to have to draft him way too early if you want him on your team. If you have him on your dynasty team, like, I don't know, somebody who might have won the PFF Fantasy Staff League, Dynasty League last year, I don't know who that might be, but if you have him like that, then you're sitting pretty. Otherwise, I don't know if I'm going to draft this guy, though I may be inclined to draft his teammate, Thomas Davis, who's a much better value, going way later in drafts and showing that he can still put up some really good numbers despite going through 3 ACL tears. And one other name I'm going to throw out there, an oldie, but hopefully still a goodie. Roman Harper in Carolina. Really, hey, stranger things have happened that players can have a revitalization, and I would not be shocked to see Roman Harper put up DB2 numbers. He's not going to look that great on the field, but it doesn't matter. You want numbers, not not eye candy, right? So ultimately, hey, Roman Harper is an interesting guy, and he's fallen pretty far in drafts, so you could scoop him way late and end up waiting at defensive back. Ross, Carolina Panthers, let's hear it.
Yeah, Harper. He's in my old sleeper team. He'll line up alongside Dante Whitner and Stevie Brown for me at safety in the all sleeper team, definitely. And like you say, he is falling far in drafts. I've got him 16, Jeff, and you've got him 14. So this is a guy we've got bang on DB1 tier. He could easily be a DB1. We've seen him be a top 5 defensive back in the past, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility he could do something like that again. And I wouldn't be surprised in shallower leagues if he goes undrafted, Jeff, because he just isn't. He isn't on people's radars. And the other guy who you also point out offers some value is Thomas Davis. Again, this guy doesn't get any love at all. I don't know whether it's the fact that Kuechly is assumed to be a tackle vacuum. I'm not really sure. But the thing is, Davis has put up points for many seasons. Maybe they're also scared by the multiple knee injuries, but that doesn't matter. This guy, well, I've got him 17, you've got him 20. So that puts him definitely as a solid LB2, yeah. You could probably get him as your 3rd or 4th linebacker in a draft. I'd be surprised if you couldn't.
Absolutely great, and that's what you got to look for on the offense and defensive side of the ball. I'm not going to say much about the Saints. I love Cameron Jordan. I think he's fabulous. I think he's going to have an even better season this year. I have him as a top 10 guy. I'm not crazy about Curtis Lofton. He's a guy. I have him. You know, you might look at my rankings. You might say, "Hey, you're crazy about." No, I mean he's a guy. He's going to put up those kind of numbers, but I'm probably looking elsewhere because I don't think his ceiling is where a lot of other players are. But Kenny Vaccaro's ceiling is enormous. I might even be. I think I have him ranked number 5 among my defensive backs right now, and I might be low on that one. So I have crazy Vaccaro love. He's falling a little bit further than that. You can scoop him maybe as the 8th, 9th, 10th defensive back off the board if your league mates are falling asleep. Love that. Don't love Jairus Byrd. Coming off back surgery, never really been a consistent IDP scorer. I'm passing on Jairus Byrd. Ross, I know that's going to get your blood boiling.
Yeah, you see, because obviously I am more of a Byrd fan, Jeff. I've talked about how he's had 70-plus tackles in the past. He had also 7 or 8 interceptions as a rookie. So he has shown he can, hit points in a multitude of ways. But I do accept Jeff's point that he is a little bit of a centre fielder and he can be overly reliant on his interceptions to be fantasy relevant. And back surgery is scary. But like you say, Jeff, he's got Vaccaro alongside him. He's got Jordan up front, so I'm expecting him to see some plenty of opportunities. Plus, of course, the Saints are a high-powered offense. Teams are going to be passing to try and beat them. So Byrd is going to have those kind of opportunities. But Vaccaro, for me, Jeff, I understand the optimism. I can't quite get him as high as you. You've got him 5. I'd be really hard-pressed to put him any higher than that personally. That's the problem this year at the top of the defensive backs. You've got Barry Church, Morgan Burnett. I would have Tyvon Branch in there, Weddle, and obviously Cyprian's a guy we've talked about in the last show as well. So it's really difficult. I think that you could definitely keep him a little bit low. Did I even mention TJ Ward that time? So TJ Ward is a guy we've talked about rising up board. So that's why I've got him at 8. I just can't quite sneak him as high as you.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy you have him ranked there. I'm happy the consensus is there because I actually was able to scoop him in my home draft. I'm in my home draft, folks. And I have 3 people pretty much next to me using my rankings drafting against me. So I have all of the odds stacked against me, but yet still managed to scoop Vaccaro there and was quite happy about that. And I got him late. I didn't have to draft him early. I don't like to draft IDPs early. You've heard me before. You know this from me. So I was happy about that. But enough about my team. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, of course, a new look Tampa Bay Buccaneers under Lovie Smith. And he set out to remake this defense, bringing in Michael Johnson to go along with Adrian Claiborne. Both of these two are potential DL2s with upside. Both of them have upside for different reasons. Johnson more sack upside, Claiborne more tackle upside, but you have to like that. Gerald McCoy is an absolute rock star in the making. He's the top defensive tackle this year, folks. With Geno Atkins coming off of that injury, it's McCoy, and he's looked unbelievable in the preseason. You have to love that. Well, of course, Levante David is fabulous, and you know that, and he's in the conversation with Kuechly. But what you may not know is Mason Foster is playing 3 downs now. We've been waiting for this one, and I'm fired up that it's finally happening because, hey, he took direction. Lovie Smith said, you got to improve in certain areas. You got to cut a little weight. He did it. And so they really trust him out there, and it looks like we're finally going to see him in that role. And boy, this guy has an LB2 ceiling easily, if not maybe a little bit higher. I mean, we've seen him put up some numbers. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but LB2 ceiling definitely, and where you're getting him as an LB3 right now is fantastic value. Of course, Alteron Werner, one of the better corners in a great system to put up numbers. You've got to love a Tampa 2 system for your cornerbacks in cornerback-required leagues. And then there's Mark Barron. And Mark Barron I absolutely love as a player. I just think the system may limit him a little bit, whereas I'm optimistic about Vaccaro. I'm a little pessimistic about Barron from an IDP standpoint. I still think he'll put up close to DB1 numbers, maybe 9th, 10th, 11th defensive back, but I really wouldn't prefer him over somebody like Vaccaro. Ross, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we're almost coming home.
Yeah, I have a very similar opinion about most of these players to you, Jeff. Like you, Barron slid down my ranking. He has been the victim of the rise of Cyprian, the rise of Vaccaro, the rise of TJ Ward. So he's the guy I've just slipped down. Doesn't mean I don't like him. I just fancy the others a little bit more from what I've seen. The only player I'm going to pick out, Jeff, just because I disagree quite strongly, is Adrian Claiborne. I don't know what it is about him. Maybe I've owned him too many times in this first few years in the league, but he's never got it done for me. He just puts up duck eggs. I know we talk about how you shouldn't get like this about your defensive ends. It does happen, but it just gets my goat. I hate being the guy that has the 0, and maybe I've had too many from Claiborne. If Claiborne misses, he misses badly, and I don't like that kind of player on my roster. So I've actually got him 33, so I'm 11 spots lower than you, Jeff, at 22. I don't think I'm going to ever own Claiborne again in fantasy.
Yeah, see, the thing I guess that gets me is ultimately 64 total tackles. Now, granted, he did have like 10 total tackles in the last week of the season last year, but I do like that tackle floor. You're not going to see that out of a lot of defensive ends, and I think the sacks are going to come this year, being that he is another year removed. But hey, that we're not always going to agree in those spots, and again, these are the places where you have to make a stand as an owner. Do you buy into Claiborne or not? Build your draft board, because ultimately it's your team. It's not my team. It's not Ross's team. It's your team. So if you buy into it, we just present our arguments and leave it out there for you. There's not a lot of arguments to be made about Arizona, however. We know Calais Campbell. We know what he is. He's a low ceiling, kind of high floor defensive end who's going to be in that 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 range every year. But I don't ever see him putting up 14, 15 sacks. So that's what you're going to get, and be careful. If that's the type of player you want, then by all means, but I like to shoot for upside. The linebacker situation, though, is a mess. Their 2 top linebackers from last year are gone. Darrell Williams suspended, Carlos Dansby we talked about last week now in Cleveland, and now that means they're dealing with Larry Foote, who's looking like an every down linebacker, or looking like he's playing every down, let's say, and then maybe Kevin Minter, if he can stay healthy. Possibly Kenny Demmons, maybe Lorenzo Alexander. You're getting what I'm getting at here. Ultimately, this is not a situation you want any piece of whatsoever. I did think Demmons actually looked somewhat good in the last preseason game, which really surprised me. You kind of took notice and like, hey, wait a minute, this guy. But nothing to be had there outside of an extraordinarily deep dynasty league. Other than that, really where you're looking for value in Arizona is going to be in this secondary. Tyrann Mathieu looks like he's going to be back a little bit quicker than we originally expected. We thought October. Now it looks like he may play in week 1. He won't be the Honey Badger right away, but that means you should be drafting him a little bit earlier than maybe you were thinking before. And, of course, the rookie Deon Buchanan. Well, there's some concern here because he isn't necessarily playing every down. He's getting out there in sub packages, but we're also seeing Tony Jefferson out there. I think ultimately this sorts itself out, and Buchanan does become an every down guy, but it may not be immediate. So make sure you're aware of that. If you drafted him and you're wondering why he's only putting up 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 tackles each week in the beginning of the season, that's why. So you may want to back off. Of course, you can tweet me, you can tweet Ross for who's playing in the every down roles, and we're always happy to discuss that sort of stuff with you on Twitter. Which, by the way, he is at Ross Miles NFL, and I'm at Jeff Ratcliffe. But Ross, how about these Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, it's another one, Jeff, where I'm not sure I'm going to end up owning many of them. Like you say, Campbell lacks the upside we see from many of the other defensive ends we've got bracketed around him. So the Dunlaps, the Houstons, the Ziggy Answers, I mean, all of those guys I'd probably draft over Campbell, despite the fact only one of them ranks above Campbell in my current rankings. And then the linebacker core, like you said, Jeff, it's a nightmare. We've lost two LB1s, and now there's a vacuum. I mean, where are all these tackles going to go? They've got to go somewhere. We kind of thought maybe Buchanan, but like you said, is he on the field? You know, he's at the turf toe. So for me, this is a really weird situation. The one player that's probably going to be drafted by me, if at all, would be Matthew. I've still got him at 32 because I'm kind of a little bit wary of the injury news. You've got him 22, so we're a little bit different there. Matthew is interesting, but because he is the honey badger, he's one of those players that I feel tends to get overdrafted because he's a fun player to own. So with an injury and being one of those kind of overdrafted players, I'm probably not going to own any Cardinals this year.
And you know what's interesting? I probably won't own any Seahawks this year. I know that's a bold statement. This is an amazing defense. It's the top team defense, of course, but from an IDP standpoint, that prowess actually limits the potential of these IDPs. Yes, Bobby Wagner's awesome, but people sometimes ask me, hey, why do you rank Bobby Wagner at 8 or 9? That's why, because his potential is limited. Now, KJ Wright is an interesting guy in deep leagues because, hey, the coaches are talking him up. He's got the right body type. He's got the right ability, 6'4", he has size, speed. He could be poised for a breakout year, but that being said, you know, that's a deeper league. The safety situation, folks, I just don't get the Earl Thomas thing. Yes, he is awesome. Earl Thomas is awesome. If he keeps up this pace, he will be a future Hall of Famer. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever. But from an IDP standpoint, he's not awesome. He was great when Bobby Wagner wasn't on the field last year, and then as soon as Bobby Wagner came back, his numbers dipped. He is not worth the top defensive back on the board that I've seen some people taking him as early as that. I'm not going there. In terms of Cam Chancellor, of course, you're looking at him as that DB2, but again, his ceiling is limited because of the prowess of this defense. So, Ross, am I crazy here? Are you taking any Seattle Seahawks, or I'm probably just crazy, right?
No, I don't think you are, Jeff. Well, okay, maybe you are crazy, but not because of this. Cliff Averill has a little bit of value to me, mainly if he's one of those guys who just gets overlooked a little bit, I think, at defensive line because of the fact they used rotation last year, the way he's been cleared a little bit with Chris Clemons' departure, and maybe Bruce Irvin hasn't quite come on as they would have hoped. So maybe Averill sees a fair bit in that Lear role and has some value. I've got him 25, you've got him 23. I do like him as my third defensive end when he's available. There's no point in adding on Wagner, like you say. He's an elite talent who is limited by the talent around him. And Earl Thomas, I totally agree. He is the #1 safety playing football in the NFL today. However, he is not a top 12 fantasy player, mainly because there's too many good players in front of him mopping up the points. It's as simple as that. He is a phenomenal player. It's just he doesn't have the same value at fantasy thanks to the talent in front of him.
Absolutely. And moving to the San Francisco 49ers, oh boy, it's always tough when, essentially a top player is out for a significant amount of time, and Navarro Bowman is certainly, he's in that conversation with Kuechly and Levante David in terms of IDP value, and he's phenomenal on the field, but we're not going to see him until at least week 9. So if you drafted him, make sure you have good replacement value. I don't know who that's necessarily going to be just yet in San Francisco. We thought it was going to be Michael Wilhoit, but I tell you what, Chris Borland has looked slightly better than Wilhoit, so we could see that rookie out there, no doubt about that, alongside Patrick Willis, but Patrick Willis is the one who stands to benefit the most from an IDP standpoint with Bowman out. Willis is back to a rock-solid LB1. I have him as my number 5. Ross, I think you're probably in the same range. That's where, you're loving Patrick Willis right in that wheelhouse. Outside of that, I'm not really crazy about much other than that here. Aldon Smith, that whole situation is pretty dangerous. It's a volatile situation, so I'm probably avoiding him despite his massive ceiling. But maybe Antoine Bethea and possibly Eric Reed, but I like Bethea of the two. I think Bethea also stands to benefit from Bowman being out, so he could see an uptick in his tackles at least over the first half of the season, and he is going at a nice value after 20 defensive backs have come off the board. Ross, coming down the home stretch, San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, like you say, Willis is my number five as well, Jeff. He definitely is the main beneficiary from the Bowman injury. But I think the interesting thing with the 49ers is working out when or if you draft Bowman, and it's the same question with Alden Smith. For me, it's not about the round, it's about the strength of your roster and how you've built it. If you've got four or five, if it's a deeper league and you start, say, three linebackers and a flex, so maybe a four, so people are just piling into linebackers and stockpiling them. I think you can probably roster both of them as your fifth or sixth linebacker if you can fit that many on your roster. As for Bethea, he's another player I'm kind of keeping tabs on, but not so much in a positive way. He's moved from Indianapolis, where he put up plenty of tackles. He's moved to a spot where even Dante Whitner couldn't get over 75, 80 tackles a season. So it's slightly concerning. Anyone who's expecting the Bethea of the last 2 or 3 seasons is probably going to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah, at least in the beginning of the season, there is some value to be had, but just be sure if he's putting up numbers, don't expect it once Bowman comes back. Those two guys on the field pretty much don't leave much for anybody else to clean up. Ross, I'm not even going to introduce the Rams. I'm going to toss this one over to you. Have fun.
Well, yes, the St. Louis Rams and Robert Quinn, my favourite player. Well, my new favourite player now, Sam Bradford, no longer exists to me. But yeah, Robert Quinn is an absolute stud. We've got him all three of us, me, Nate, and Jeff, all rank him number two overall. But it's kind of a 1A to 1B situation. I haven't seen too many people rank Quinn above Watt, but it isn't a crazy thought because of the slight changes to the Texas system. And of course, Quinn outscored Watt last year. You know, this is a guy who hasn't got double-digit sack upside. He could even put 20 sacks on the board. That's what he's aiming for this season. So very interesting. But the Rams' whole defensive line has value this year, all four of them. So chuck in Long, Brockers, and Donald. Obviously, so I'm so excited I can't even hold it in. Brookers and Donald both have value in defensive tackle leagues rather than defensive line when you combine the two. But Long, I've got 31. You've got 29. He's one of those players that doesn't really have the sack upside you'd kind of hope for, but at the same time isn't effective against the run. He's a good all-round player. He's a bit like Roberson for me. He's the kind of guy you grab off the bench and grab off your waivers to fill in for you. Brookers and Donald, we've both got around the 40 to 50 mark in our rankings, so we're kind of keeping an eye on them. We both slightly prefer Donald because of the sack upside, where Brookers is a bit more consistent. Again, we still got more value, so at least I can own some Rams. At least there's some joy. I'm a fantasy fan. I'm not a Rams fan. What happens this season doesn't matter. Laurinaitis and Ogletree, both of them can flirt with LB1 status this year, although I personally got them both ranked outside. I still have Laurinaitis above Ogletree, but Jeff, you have them the other way round. You've got Ogletree at number 11, so I know you really like this guy's playmaking ability on the outside for the Rams defense. You know, we've talked about sideline to sideline defenders, and Ogletree's definitely one of those. He's also got the capability to pick a pass or two and return it to the house. And let's keep going. There's even defensive backs you can own from the Rams on your fantasy team, so there is some solace to be had. Janoris Jenkins is a valuable corner in cornerback required leagues, not only because he can make interceptions and return them, which he did, 5 or 6 as a rookie, but also because he's not as good as advertised, unfortunately. He can be baited and he can be beaten, and that kind of thing means you're going to get targeted. Targeted means fantasy points, so Jenkins is someone you should definitely consider for CB required leagues. And then let's talk about TJ McDonald, who missed all of last season with an injury after being drafted by the Rams. He is someone who Fisher knows because of his relationship with his father, and obviously we're now getting Greg Williams back to run this defense, and he's not shy about getting safeties in the box and asking them to blitz. So McDonald is a guy who I see falling in a lot of drafts. He's a top 20 defensive back for me. I've got him 20. Jeff's got him 19. There's plenty of Rams here to own, so jump on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And that Greg Williams shift can't be understated, folks. When he was in New Orleans, he was one of the more innovative defensive coordinators in the league, and we also saw massive fantasy value out of guys like, hey, the aforementioned Roman Harper. McDonald is the guy. Watch for a breakout. And, yeah, I can't say it much better than Ross did there for the St. Louis Rams, so you got a ton of Rams knowledge condensed into a couple minutes there. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you enjoyed the entire show. Remember, if you're not a Fantasy Gold subscriber, go out and get that subscription. What are you waiting for? And you can get it for just $10 if you head over to DraftKings and you use the promo code PFF. That's a tough one to remember. PFF, and you just deposit $10. $10. You get a 100% deposit bonus, and you get gold for free. You get all kinds of fun stuff. You get crazy content from all of us. rankings, projections, etc. You know this. You've heard this show before. So go out and do it. Otherwise, stay tuned because we're going to be back for more. I cannot believe we got through 32 teams in less than 2 hours, but we did it, Ross. So for Pro Football Focus, he is Ross Miles. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and that's a wrap.